It's been 87 days since either of us set foot in the basement. We know it's too late to run. The whispers have finally stopped begging us to come down. Now, they're daring us. I wish I could go back. I really do. I'd grab that smiling, naive idiot I used to be by the shoulders, so excited about our future, and I'd tell him to run, to grab Sarah's hand, run, and never, ever look back. But I can't, so I'm telling this story. I guess it's a warning, or maybe it's just a confession before the silence up here is finally broken for good. The house was our dream, or at least the bones of it were. A two-story colonial on the edge of some forgotten town, with white paint peeling like sunburnt skin and shutters the color of faded sea glass. It had been on the market for over a year, the price dropping and dropping until it was firmly in too good to be true territory. But we were young, we had a vision, and we were sure that our love and a few gallons of paint could bring it back to life. I remember the realtor walking us through it. Her smile seemed just as brittle as the yellowed wallpaper she kept complimenting for its vintage character. She showed us the living room, dust dancing in the afternoon light, and pointed out the original hardwood floors. She walked us through the kitchen, a 1970s time capsule of avocado green appliances, and the grand staircase that groaned under our feet. Then she led us to a narrow door just off the kitchen. And this, she said, her hand pausing on the brass knob, goes to the basement. It's unfinished, of course, just storage and utilities, but it's spacious. She pulled it open, and a wave of cool, musty air rolled over us. It was so different from the stuffy warmth of the rest of the house. It smelled of damp earth, wet stone, and something else, something vaguely organic and foul, like potatoes left to rot in a dark cupboard. I just told myself that's what old, neglected cellars smell like. I flicked on the single bare bulb dangling from a cord, casting a weak yellow light on the steep wooden steps. Below was a cave of shadows, stone walls, a packed dirt floor in one corner, and a concrete slab in the other, where a huge furnace and a water heater stood like silent, rusting guards. "It's a basement," I said, trying to sound impressed. Sarah, though, hadn't moved. She just stood at the top of the stairs, peering into the gloom with her arms crossed. "It's cold," she said, her voice quiet. "Really cold." The realtor just laughed. "Old houses, poor insulation in the foundation. Nothing a little work can't fix." We bought the house. We were blinded by the vision of what it could be. Christmases in the big living room, dinners in a new kitchen, a whole life built inside those walls. We barely gave the basement a second thought. It was just a place for boxes, for stuff we didn't need right away, a project for later. That was our first mistake. We treated it like it was just another room. It was never just a room. It was the heart of the house, and its heart was already beating. The first few weeks were a blur of happy, exhausting work, tearing up carpets, stripping wallpaper, painting walls. We were a team, fueled by cheap pizza and the promise of our future. We were genuinely happy. The house felt like it was becoming ours. The upstairs, the main floor, we were filling them with our light, our laughter. But the basement stayed untouched. We'd crack the door open to toss a box down or to check a breaker, but we never lingered. That cold was a physical thing, a wall you had to push through. It felt like it sucked the warmth right out of you, a chill that stuck to your skin long after you'd shut the door. The first time I heard it, it was so quiet I barely registered it. About a month in, I was in the living room, wrestling with a flat-pack bookshelf and cursing the instructions. Sarah was in the kitchen, humming along to the radio. And then I heard it. A whisper. It was faint, like static from a radio caught between stations. I couldn't make out any words, just a soft, hissing sound. "Hey, Sarah, you say something?" I called out. "No, honey, just singing," she yelled back. I shrugged. Old houses make noise. Creaking floors, settling foundations, wind whistling through a crack in a window. It was easy to let your imagination get away from you. I went back to the bookshelf and forgot all about it. A week later, Sarah brought it up. She was at the kitchen sink, just staring out into the backyard. "That's weird," she mumbled. "What's up?" I asked, grabbing a glass from the cupboard. "I keep thinking I hear someone talking, like really, really quiet. I thought maybe the neighbors were outside." I looked out. The neighbor's house was a good 50 yards away, with a thick stand of trees between us. "No way. Probably just the wind." "No, it didn't sound like the wind," she said, turning to face me, her brow furrowed. "It sounded like a voice. It sounded like it was coming from right under my feet." She was standing directly over the basement. A little knot of unease tightened in my gut, but I pushed it down. There had to be a logical explanation. Old pipes, the furnace kicking on, an animal in the walls. Ghosts were at the bottom of a very long list. "It's just an old house, Sarah," I said, putting an arm around her. "It's got its own soundtrack." She leaned into me, but didn't look convinced. "I guess it's just creepy." At first, that was our mantra. It's nothing. We were rational people. We believed in things you could measure. Flickering lights were bad wiring. Cold spots were drafts. The weird smells were just the signature scent of a century-old basement. But the cold was different. It wasn't just a draft. There was one spot, right in the hallway, directly over where we figured the center of the basement was, that was always degrees colder than anywhere else. You'd walk through it and the temperature would just plummet. The air would feel thick, heavy, and the hairs on your arms would stand on end. We even bought a thermometer to prove we weren't crazy. One scorching July day, the thermostat read 78. In that spot, the thermometer dropped to 65. It made no sense. We just figured we needed to call a contractor about the insulation. And the whispers kept happening. Never loud, never clear, always on the very edge of your hearing. Sometimes, late at night, when the house was dead silent, I'd lie in bed and just listen. It sounded like a conversation in a distant room, the words all muffled. But there was no distant room. There was just the main floor and the basement below it. Sarah started sleeping badly. She'd wake up in the middle of the night swearing she'd heard something, a footstep, a door creaking. I'd hold her and tell her it was just a dream, but I was starting to lose my own conviction, because sometimes I heard it too. The worst part, though, was the feeling of being watched. You'd be alone in a room and a chill would just crawl up your spine. It was that primal, animal feeling of a predator in the tall grass. You'd spin around expecting someone to be standing right there, but there was only empty space. But the feeling stayed, the feeling that you were not alone. It was a total violation of the one place you're supposed to feel safe. The change was slow. So slow you couldn't put your finger on when our denial finally broke. It was like that old story about boiling a frog. The water heats up so gradually, it doesn't realize it's being cooked until it's too late. For us, the water was getting dangerously hot. The whispers started to get texture, personality. They weren't just formless sounds anymore. We started to pick out different tones. One was a low, guttural murmur, an angry grumble that seemed to vibrate up through the floor. Another was higher, a thin, wheezing sound, like someone fighting for every breath. And the worst one the one that turned my blood to ice, was the sound of a child crying. It was never loud, just a faint, heartbreaking sob that would drift up from the basement in the dead of night. The first time we both clearly heard the crying, we were in bed reading. The sound just cut through the silence. We both froze. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her eyes huge in the lamplight. I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "It sounds like a kid." We got out of bed and crept to the top of the stairs, listening. Nothing, just the familiar silence of the old house. "Maybe it was the TV," I said, knowing perfectly well the TV was off. "No," Sarah said, shaking her head. "It came from downstairs, from the basement." We stood there for a long, long time just listening to nothing. The absence of the sound was somehow even more terrifying. It was a confirmation. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the pipes. It was something else. Something in our house. It started to tear us apart. The house, our shared dream, became a battleground. I was clinging to logic, trying to explain everything away. Sarah was convinced the house was haunted. She started digging into local history, spending hours online, scrolling through old town records, searching for some tragedy, some death that could explain it all. "I'm telling you, Alex, something is wrong here. We can't keep pretending this is normal." "And what do you want to do, Sarah? Call a ghost hunter?" I'd snap back, my own fear making me angry. "We sunk every penny we have into this place. We can't just leave." The cold spot in the hallway started to move. It wasn't just in one place anymore. Sometimes you'd feel it at the top of the stairs, other times by the kitchen door. It was an active, mobile cold, like the source of it was just wandering around our first floor. It felt like the house had a disease, a sickness spreading from the basement. Then came the footsteps. At first, they were faint, like a mouse scurrying, but they got bolder. We'd be on the couch watching TV, and we would hear the clear sound of heavy boots walking across the concrete floor right below us. Thump, thump, thump. We'd mute the TV, frozen, and just listen. The footsteps would cross the length of the basement and then just stop. We tried to explain it away, the furnace, the water heater, anything, but we knew what we were hearing. It was the sound of someone walking around in our locked basement. And the more we ignored it, the louder it got. The house was trying to get our attention. It was done whispering. It was starting to shout. The breaking point was a Tuesday night in late October. The air was getting crisp. The leaves were turning. We had just finished a tense, quiet dinner when we heard a new sound. A loud, rhythmic banging from the basement. Bang, bang, bang. It was deliberate. It sounded exactly like someone hitting one of the steel support poles with a hammer. We just looked at each other. All the excuses were gone. "I'm going down there," I said, my voice trying to sound braver than I felt. "No, Alex, don't," Sarah pleaded, grabbing my arm. "Please, let's just call someone." "Call who? The cops? And tell them what? That we think our furnace is possessed?" I pulled away. "I have to see. I have to know." I grabbed the heaviest flashlight we had, the cold metal a small comfort in my trembling hand. I walked to the basement door, my heart pounding against my ribs. Sarah stood a few feet back, her face ghost white. I took a deep breath, unlocked the deadbolt we'd installed a month earlier, and pulled the door open. The cold that hit me was worse than ever. It was a physical force, a freezing wall that smelled of wet clay and something else, something metallic and sweet, like old pennies in decay. The banging had stopped the second my hand touched the doorknob. The silence it left behind felt heavy, like it was waiting for me. I shined the flashlight down the rickety stairs. The beam cut through the dark, lighting up the dust and the concrete floor. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Is someone down here?" Only silence answered. Taking another shaky breath, I started down, each step groaning. The air got colder and colder the further I went, a deep cold that made my bones ache. Sarah stayed at the top, a silhouette against the warm kitchen light. I got to the bottom and swept the light across the room. It was exactly as we'd left it. Boxes, paint cans, the hulking furnace. Nothing out of place. I walked over to the support poles. No hammer, no dent, no sign anyone had been there. "There's nothing here," I called up to Sarah, frustrated. Was I going crazy? Were we both? As I turned to go back, the flashlight beam caught something on the far stone wall, in the corner with the dirt floor. Scratches. They were not there before. I was sure of it. I walked closer. The scratches were gouged into the mortar between the stones. They weren't random. They formed weird symbols, like a crude map. It made no sense. And then I saw it. At the base of the wall, half buried in the damp earth, was a small wooden box. It was ancient, the wood warped and dark. My curiosity won out over my fear. I knelt down, the cold ground seeping through my jeans, and started digging the box out with my bare hands. The dirt was cold and clammy. The second my fingers closed around the box, a whisper cut through the silence. This was different. It wasn't in the walls or under the floor. This whisper was crystal clear, and it was right next to my ear. "Mine," it said. A man's voice, low and possessive. I flinched back like I'd been burned, scrambling backward and falling hard on the floor. The flashlight flew out of my hand, rolling away and casting wild, spinning shadows on the ceiling. I was in almost total darkness, with just the faint light from the open door at the top of the stairs. Panic took over. My breath came in ragged gasps. I could hear blood roaring in my ears, and under it, the whispers started again. All of them, the grumbling, the wheezing, the child's sobs, all swirling together in a storm of sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then, another voice joined in. This one was the most terrifying because I knew it. It was Sarah's voice. "Alex? Honey? Are you okay?" It called from the darkness in front of me. But it wasn't her. Sarah was at the top of the stairs. I could see her silhouette. This was a trick, a lure. "Alex, help me!" The voice that sounded like my wife pleaded, now sounding hurt. "I fell. Please, help me." "Don't listen!" The real Sarah screamed from the doorway. "Alex, get out of there, now!" Her voice broke the spell. I crab-walked backward, my hands flailing for the flashlight. My fingers brushed against the metal, and I snatched it, flicking it on. I aimed the beam where the voice had been. Nothing, just empty, cold darkness. But the whispers grew louder, a vortex of sound pulling at me. And in the chaos, I could now make out words. Not just my name, but a single, repeated command. "Stay," they hissed. "Stay, stay, stay." I didn't wait for another invitation. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted for the stairs, not daring to look back. I took them two at a time, bursting into the warm kitchen. I slammed the basement door shut and threw the deadbolt, my whole body shaking. Sarah rushed to me, and we just clung to each other. Two terrified survivors on a tiny island. The investigation was over. We knew, without a doubt, that we were not alone, and it did not want us to leave. After that night, the house declared war. The subtlety was gone. It was like we had crossed some invisible line and now the gloves were off. The thing in the basement was done whispering from the shadows. It wanted us out. Or worse, it wanted us to join it. Things started happening every day. Doors would slam shut with enough force to shake the walls. Lights would flicker and die for hours, then flare back to life. Objects moved. We'd leave a mug on the counter and find it shattered in the living room. Sarah's jewelry box from our dresser was found open at the bottom of the main staircase, the contents scattered like teeth. We were under siege. The pressure was unbearable, a constant, grinding fear that destroyed our nerves and our relationship. We fought all the time, not because we were mad at each other, but because we were terrified and helpless. We stopped sleeping in our bedroom, dragging the mattress into the living room to be together, as if that offered any protection. It didn't. One afternoon, Sarah was doing laundry in the little utility closet off the kitchen. I was in the living room, trying to read. Suddenly, I heard her scream my name, a raw, terrified sound. I ran into the kitchen. The closet door was shut. I could hear Sarah pounding on it from the other side. "Alex, it won't open, I'm trapped," she cried, her voice choked with panic. I yanked on the knob. It was stuck fast, like it was bolted from the inside. "Hold on," I yelled, and threw my shoulder into it. The wood groaned but held. I slammed my weight against it again and again. Finally, with a splintering crack, the frame gave and the door flew open. Sarah stumbled out, gasping for air, her face streaked with tears. "The door just slammed shut," she sobbed, collapsing into my arms. "And the light went out. It was so cold in there, Alex, and I heard them. The whispers were all around me." That was it, the final straw. We had to get out. Just for a night, we told ourselves. Just to breathe, to feel safe. We threw a few things into a bag and ran to my car. I slid into the driver's seat, put the key in the ignition, and turned it. Click. Nothing. Not even a sputter. The battery was dead. It was a new car. The battery couldn't be dead. I tried again. Click, click, click. A cold dread washed over me. I looked up at the house. It stood there, silent, its windows like vacant eyes. It felt like it was mocking us. It was telling us we weren't going anywhere. Defeated, we went back inside. The second we stepped through the front door, every light in the house went out at once. We were plunged into suffocating darkness. And then, from the basement, came a sound we had never heard before. Laughter. A deep, guttural, triumphant laugh that echoed through the entire house. We didn't have a plan. We were just running on fear. Sarah remembered reading about spiritual cleansings, sage, salt, things from movies. It felt stupid, but we were desperate. We took Sarah's car, which started right up, and drove to a New Age shop in the next town over. We felt like idiots buying sage bundles and sea salt to fight whatever was in our home, but it was better than doing nothing. We came back that evening, armed with our pathetic weapons. We went through the house, room by room, burning sage until the air was thick with smoke, sprinkling salt across every doorway and windowsill. When we got to the basement door, I hesitated. The laughter had stopped, but a cold energy was pouring from the door. "We have to," Sarah said, her voice a determined whisper. I nodded. I unbolted the door and threw it open. We stood at the top of the stairs, refusing to go down, and threw handfuls of salt into the darkness. We waved the smoking sage, sending plumes of smoke into the cellar. For a second, there was silence, and then the house roared. A furious, violent sound exploded from the basement, so loud it felt like it could tear the foundations apart. The basement door, which I was still holding, slammed shut with impossible force. It caught my hand, crushing it against the frame. I screamed, yanking my hand back. It was already swelling, a deep, ugly purple spreading across my knuckles. The deadbolt on the door slid shut on its own, with a loud final clack. We were locked out. Or maybe it was locked in. The whispers started again, but they were different. They weren't just in the basement anymore. They were right behind us, in the hallway, in the kitchen. They were upstairs with us, and they were angry. Then we heard a new voice, clear and articulate, speaking over the others. "You must not leave," it said, the words slow, seeming to come from the very walls. "One must stay. One must always stay and listen. We were trapped. Running was no longer an option. The house wouldn't let us go. We were part of its story now. The point of no return had passed us by, and we hadn't even seen it. It wasn't about escaping anymore. It was about surviving. It's been 87 days since the door slammed on my hand. The bones healed, but there's a deep ache in them that never leaves. A constant reminder. We live on the second floor now. We pushed a heavy desk and a dresser against our bedroom door at night. We barricaded the main staircase with bookshelves and chairs. It's a pathetic, useless barrier against something that doesn't need to use the stairs, but it's all we have. The house is quiet now, mostly. The slamming doors and moving objects have stopped. It's like it won, so it doesn't have to try anymore. It has us right where it wants us. The silence is worse than the noise. It's a heavy, watchful silence. We're mice in a cage, and the cat is just sitting outside, watching, waiting. We're rationing the food we had upstairs. We use buckets for water because the taps only work for a few hours at a time, sometimes going days without a drop. We have no power, no way to contact the outside world. Our phones died weeks ago. Sometimes we look out the window and see people drive by, completely oblivious. We've screamed, banged on the glass, but it's like we're in another dimension. The sound doesn't travel. No one sees us. We are ghosts in our own home. Some days I look at Sarah and see a stranger, her face carved into a permanent mask of fear. Some days we don't speak at all. The silence between us is heavy as the silence in the house. And some days we just break down and hold each other, sobbing for the life we lost, for the future that was stolen from us the day we signed the deed. Is any of this real? Are we insane? But then a cold spot will drift into the room, or a faint whisper will echo from downstairs, and we know this nightmare is real. The whispers from the basement have changed. For weeks they pleaded and begged. They used my voice to call to Sarah, and her voice to call to me. They promised to let one of us go if the other would just come down. We learned to ignore them. We had to. But a few days ago the pleading stopped. The new tone is a dare, a challenge. The whispers are confident, mocking. They don't beg anymore. They tell us what they're going to do when they finally decide to come upstairs. Last night I heard a new sound. Not from the basement, from the attic. A slow, rhythmic creaking. The sound of footsteps on the floorboards right above our heads. It knows about our barricade. It's reminding us that it has the whole house. It can get to us whenever it wants. It's just playing with its food. We ignored the voices in our basement, and now it's too late. The question is no longer if it will get to us. The only question left is when.
If you've ever experienced something you can't explain in your own home, something that made you feel like an intruder where you should feel safe, share your story in the comments. It helps to know you're not the only one. And if you want to hear more stories about the darkness that can hide in plain sight, make sure you like this and subscribe. Conclusion. The creaking from the attic has stopped. But just now, I heard something else. A faint scratching sound. It's coming from the other side of our bedroom door.